Hi, my name is Phil, and my wife Amy and I are fixing an old house. Old houses are full of surprises, and when you are fixing an old house, you might find yourself thinking, how the heck is this house still standing? So I thought it might be fun to do a video on the crazy things we found in this house. Even if you don't know much about electrical wiring, you would know this is wrong. We found junction boxes that were so overfull that the cover couldn't be put back on. We found electrical boxes that had big holes knocked in so more wiring could be jammed in. Inside walls, we found cables spliced together with electrical tape. The house had a suicide light fixture in the shower. This was an ungrounded fixture with a standard light bulb socket. I find it hard to believe anyone would think that that's okay. Electrical water heaters are required to have a dedicated disconnect switch, at least in the United States, and it did. But the electrical panel in the house obviously didn't have enough capacity for an electrical water heater circuit, so they did what any sensible person would do, and they somehow wired it all the way back to the electrical meter. And by that, I mean there was literally no way to shut off the power to this disconnect switch in the basement. I had all the circuit breakers from the sub panel and the main panel shut off, including the main service breaker to the property. Literally no power anywhere because I wasn't sure which circuit breaker fed this cable, and I was certain it couldn't possibly have power to it. But out of a sense of my own mortality, I tested it anyway, and sure enough, it was still powered on. If I had cut it without checking, I would have had 220 volts and as much current as could flow through the wiring and the jaws of my cable cutters from the utility pole. Who knows how many hundreds of amps, and potentially a deadly arc flash. We had to wait until the electricians came to swap over the power to our new masthead and service panel. Then I cut the cabling and demolished the switch. In several spots, this house had jack studs and king studs that were actually scabbed together in pieces, and the load-bearing stud didn't actually reach the floor or the ceiling. Load-bearing walls had been moved to build a built-in bookcase, and a couple of 2x4s were all that was holding up the ceiling in that part of the living room. We found load-bearing studs that had been cut in half or worse. The master bathroom is a perfect example of the bizarre carpentry. The walls were cut apart so that built-in shelving could be added. Now, normally, you would make sure that support runs from floor to ceiling, and any span of any significance has a proper header, just like the framing around a window or a door. But this house lacked that in so many spaces. Of course, we fixed all of it, but that's another video. There was a boiler flue in the cellar in the center of the house that had obviously been leaking hot gases since the wood near it was a bit charred. Speaking of charred wood, there was wood paneling in front of the fireplace that covered the chimney. Also, there was an electrical cable that ran across the chimney behind the paneling to power an electrical outlet on the other side. It's obvious that the chimney was leaking hot gases behind the paneling, and the furring strips and the wiring were getting hot enough to char the wood. So there was a leak there in terms of hot gases coming out.
Oh yeah?
That had to be.
Why?
Well, I mean, if it was charred here, then there had to be a leak of hot gases coming through. And it looks like it. It's all black and sooty.
Yeah.
Because of the way the elevator was built, floor joists had been cut, and the master bedroom was basically being held up by the framing of the elevator, which is pretty scary because the bottom plate and the first few inches of those studs were pretty badly rotten. That is why in the demolition video you see a temporary frame supporting some of the floor joists while we demolish the elevator. We replaced some of those joists and sistered the ones nearby that had been riddled with holes for electrical wiring. We also sistered 2 joists in the bathroom. that had been hacked apart for plumbing, and we put in blocking from one of the joists to the sill plate since about 15 inches of the bathroom floor was unsupported. The floor in the master bathroom was rotted in places. I'll put together a video on fixing the joists and installing a new subfloor soon. One of the corners of the foundation, the inside corner where the master suite is shaped like a reverse L, was sitting on dirt held in place with some metal lath and plaster and held up by a rusty screw jack. Outside, the soil had been built up over the years to the point it was above the level of the sill plate on the foundation wall. This means that water was getting into the house over the sill. Fortunately, where we can see, there is minimal rot and the foundation and the sill are in acceptable condition. In fact, mostly really good condition, surprisingly good. Probably because we live in a fairly dry climate. But there is one spot where there is a gap between an old foundation wall and a newer one. That allowed not only water, but soil and possibly critters, definitely critters, to get in. In the spring, we will be digging out that side and patching it, then patching what at one point was the rim joist that sits on top of the sill plate. Now just an odd hole that looks like rot, but when you poke at the wood that remains, it's pretty clearly not rotten. And while there's a little insect damage, it mostly looks as if it was broken. In order to do the repair properly, we're waiting until we take up that part of the oak floor in the living room. We filled in an empty concrete chute on the east side of the house that at one point had held an automatic vent that supplied combustion air for the boiler in the cellar. The vent was gone, but the chute simply let water and bugs and other critters into the house. We filled it with concrete since it will eventually sit behind a shrub. Speaking of bugs and critters, at some point someone installed a light fixture on the exterior wall of the living room, but instead of installing a box, they simply drilled a hole through the wall and ran cable out. That might have been fine for a while, but that light fixture eventually came loose and wasps discovered a nice safe place to build a nest. A pretty big one. It was obvious that mice had been using the wood paneling and heating duct as a thoroughfare going north-south in the house. That's all gone now, and it smells
much better.
There was some truly sketchy plumbing. We never really figured out exactly how the washing machine drained, but apparently there was a slope on the neighbor's property that used to get wet whenever the washing machine was running. Anyway, there was something involving a wine cork and a couple of garden hoses and a trench of packed dirt in the floor of the north basement. This is under the elevator. And that is some sort of garden hose connected to a drain. And there's another garden hose that goes up through the wall. And that is a wine cork. Holy cow. Why is there a wine cork? That's the drain for the washing machine. It's connected to a hose. The pipe to a hose, and it's connected to a fitting. This was all planned for when we bought the house. Get a good inspection, but also be sure you know the fundamentals are sound. When you make an offer on a house, make sure you get the septic or sewer lines inspected. Estimate that if it's 50 or more years old, you might have quite a bit of electrical to do. Plan to replace the HVAC if that hasn't been upgraded in the last 20 years. And keep in mind that most things you touch will need to be brought up to code, at least to the satisfaction of your local inspectors. We're really enjoying fixing this house. It helps that we both have a similar vision for how it should look, what parts we want to keep, and what parts really need to change or be outright reconstructed. If you enjoyed this video, or even if you kept hoping the house would actually fall down, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to click on the bell next to the word subscribe so you get notified when I upload another video. Thanks for watching.